Hi there, I'm just about to start turn 2 and I wasn't planning to do a video, but we're going to go to the psychological warfare table in just a minute, so I thought I'd show you that because it's the first time it's come up. Other points of note are that the Ottomans come in now because we're starting the autumn of 1914. However, this is to remind me there's a restriction. They cannot move this way, so essentially they can't go and sort of defend Basra and Fao. So these ports are actually invitingly open at the moment. I think that's just for this year, this last turn of the year. They're invitingly open for naval invasion, perhaps from the British. And you'll see that the British have actually... I went back because I realised, if you remember the last turn, over on the Western Front, the Entente had played, they had 3 extra or 2 extra impulses, I can't remember exactly which, they didn't use, and then I went back and realised, well, they could have been moving Brits around at naval moves and so forth, so I went back and did that. So essentially the Brits, they're thinking, okay, after the first impulse, no, after the Germans started their Eastern Front push, they quickly realised, okay, they're not moving on the Western Front. So instead of going to bolster that, they've gone over to try and take out what they can see, or at least threaten the Ottomans, who they could sense were obviously going over to the Central Powers side. So that's what's happening there, sort of on the fronts. I just thought I'd quickly show the cards chosen. So because there's only so many contingency cards, you don't want to be playing them all the time, because a lot of sorry, I said contingency cards, I meant campaign cards, so the ones with the objectives. So a lot of them they have at the bottom always, which means they're always discarded when played. So you might want to, sort of nurse or save up some of those extra impulses and so forth. And the Germans, looking at the Central Powers, but essentially the Germans at this point, looking at theirs, thought, okay, not to play them nothing to do in the West, nothing in the East they wanted to use, because they couldn't particularly reach those objectives at this point, but they didn't want to fall behind, so they've just taken the Hindenburg Ludendorff card, which will give them an extra impulse and a 1 right shift, and it is only discarded on a 6+, so that's not likely to go away, but it might. So that's their choice. Then the Entente have taken Laguerre allow trance, which gives them a combat shift on all fronts, but no extra impulses. So we're only going to have 1.5, as it were, or 1 on one front with with 2 impulses this turn. They're bringing up the blockade. So they should have really maybe chosen this last turn instead of going to upping up their air, but that's what they did. And in the east, they have chosen Plan A. So that's to catch an Austro-Hungarian city. That means they've had to discard Plan G, which was to take a German city. So the Russians, looking at that situation, they've got 2 extra impulses to do that. So that's interesting. Yeah, so despite what I just said, we're actually going to get 3 impulses on the Eastern Front. The Germans will get 2. And potentially the Germans could keep that, because it's contingency. They can play it. Oh no, you only get 3 impulses. So, but if it was summer and there was a potentially 4 impulse turn, they could have kept that and played it after the Russians had finished theirs. So you can jump in with a contingency when you like, as long as there's impulses available left. So that's what we're looking at in those terms. Then the next thing is to look at the psychological warfare. So we've got an example of a psychological warfare table there. Maybe I can move this and we get a bit more light on it. So we have propaganda, espionage, subversion, sabotage, or counterintelligence. I don't have a clue what these do. So I've got my handy rule book. I just carefully place them over the map encounters there. And we can see propaganda in 1914 it goes one left, so that's, I think, not so great. Yes, because you're looking to get a PW, psychological warfare 1 or 2 result. And R is, well, it depends on what you're doing. So subversion, espionage, sabotage, and then the counterintelligence. So we both secretly do this, and remember the Entente only have 1. So so propaganda can add to morale. Espionage, you can check units on production track or enemy forces on the map. And obviously it's a pseudo player, that's not so appealing. Subversion, you can place guerrilla units. Okay, so definitely going to go for subversion. And then sabotage. You can delay enemy production, so they're going to be doing that. So not propaganda yet, but 2 subversions, 3, 2 of each, and 1 counterintelligence. In case the Entente play. The Entente have actually got 2, and I think they're going to go for sabotage 2. Okay, so then we just roll on the tables. So, for example, the 2 sabotagers with no counterintelligence from 2 central powers sabotagers. We have a 2. A roll, I get a 6. That's PW2. And looking at sabotage, friendly player may devastate anyone, enemy, industrial or petroleum hex. Fantastic. So I get a handy devastate marker, and I'm going to place that right on my. Then we roll for the central powers subversion attempt. Again on the 2 column, 2, no result. Okay, so the Entente going for sabotage, but there's 1 counterintelligence, so they're only rolling on the 1 column. They get a 2, no result. So that's that over. I would normally have alternated those apparently, so it would have been 1 central powers and 1 Entente. That would have, depending on who's got counterintelligence. And then now we go to the operationals phase, so I think I'll do that off camera. It is going to be interesting though, because you can see all the navies. These are like the off-map holding boxes. Each side's sporting, obviously not so huge in the central powers. There's going to be some naval manoeuvres, although I did look at the amphibious assault table, and essentially you the biggest units we have at the moment are 2 division corps. That's strength of 10, and they would be automatically assaulting any normal ports, a strength of 5 minimum, so that's only on the 2-to-1 combat table. So if the Brits, say, tried to go to FAO, they're not going to get very good odds, and then you get a -2 left shift automatically just for it being an amphibious assault. So it's going to be risky, very risky, and the gains could be great because you get a toehold in the well, not so much. I can't really say so much the rear, but if we got toehold here and we were able to move through the Ottoman Empire, we would take some cities quite cheaply, which would become on the Central Power's side. So that would drop the Central Power morale, and then we could threaten through maybe move through Bulgaria, because that might come in on the Central Power's side as well, up into Austria-Hungary. I don't know. It's a decision worth thinking about. Otherwise, of course, we could invade via the Mediterranean. But there's restrictions on the Entente entering Greece. If we enter Albania, then they go over to the Central Powers side, and otherwise we're talking about Austria-Hungary. So maybe we'd have to wait for Italy to join the war. But even then, there's restrictions on the other Entente units entering Italy as well. Some naval units are actually on the map as well in these handy little, you've got your little arrow saying they're actually based at that port. These are, and that's a new heads up, is that turns out my game is the first edition. There's a second edition of the game which includes an expansion which has like errata counters and then whole slew of the sheets that you see me playing with here, and these like player aids and so forth on CD. Now all of that is available on the Decision Games website, so I've got it and I downloaded it and been looking through it, and the updated second edition rules have made some changes in the naval procedures. Now I can't bring them into effect without a certain table, and also there's a mobile warfare table mentioned which I don't have at the moment. There's just that's talking land combat. So it's just interesting that some changes in the second edition, so it means you have to be aware, especially with the naval procedures, that I'm using slightly outdated rules system. This game is still for sale on the Decision Games website. I bought my edition some years ago in a games shop in London. It was in their bargain bin. Obviously, a huge game like this wasn't cheap, but it was a bargain for what it is. I don't know. It's one of those things which I love finding, and I guess a game like this it is expensive and it is big, so it's a sort of a big ask. And the casual buyer in a games shop is not often willing to do that, so I was lucky there. This naval question's really getting to me. I just keep sort of putting it off, because we've got all these naval forces. There's something to be done with them, and I just don't know what. Part of it is trying to wrap my head around what's possible. I actually drew up, where are they? It's a couple of schematas of what naval movements are possible. So for example, to summarise, because the off-map display looks nice, but it doesn't actually tell you, can you go from here to here? It's not clear because it looks nice, but it's sort of, they've taken a map and drawn a few lines on it. So these are the overland possibilities, and these are the actual sea areas. And then similarly, I've not coloured it yet, but from the Med you can go to the Atlantic, from the Atlantic you can go to the Indian or to the East Pacific and so forth. So how the onboard sea areas, these circled ones, relate to the off-map sea areas. I don't know. I think part of it is because I've got two sides to think from, so I should probably take one side each, and seeing as the central powers are going first, as they do every turn, I should take them first and consider what they might possibly do. Essentially, actually now I remember it, they're going to send some guys off to the commerce rating display. That's where things are really going to start happening. For that, they have to have a route off the top of the map here, which means that as they move through here, there's the chance of at least one of the English fleets intercepting them. Let's see. Okay, so looking at the naval rules, they're quite different in the, the basis is similar, the same counters and all that sort of thing, same combat tables, interception table and that, but the procedures are different in the first edition and the second, or at least the current edition of the rules. The current edition includes two extra phases in the game turn, one of them taking place before the regular impulses phases, and that's where you check sea areas to see if they're contested, and essentially that's to find out who's dominant there, and then that will determine the ability to conduct amphibious invasions. You need to have a dominance in an area, and also the likelihood of coastal barrages, and also you can cause mobilization hits, i.e. take points off what people have available for their reinforcements, their mobilization, simulating attacks on supply lines and that. But it's significantly different from the first edition rules, to make it confusing for me trying to sort of work between one and the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the first edition rules for a few turns at least, and then I'm going to play it with the second edition rules as far as I can, because I'm missing a table. I've asked out for it, but there's a table which you get with that which I don't have, but I can play most of it at least, I think. But anyway, we'll see. So, but I plan to do that for my interest and also for interest on the video, just as a resource for anyone looking at this for the naval component of the game. So be aware that what I'm doing now is for the first edition of the rules. So for example, the first edition of the rules, I've got Central Powers fleets here, and he's got 2 here, he's got 1 here, German in fact, and the Austrians are down here. And then 3 British fleets, and the Central Powers want to move some units off the map there. Now, normally the British would have to be patrolling here, the hex and adjacent hexes, and if I pass through, then they have a chance of interception. So without that patrol, they can just move straight off onto the commerce raiding display. And I think that's essentially what they're going to do. They have the chance to slip away doing that right now, whilst they have the initiative with the first impulse. Otherwise, you can that would be a transit attack, so you try to intercept a unit transiting through seas nearby. Otherwise, you can go for a general engagement, which would be, say, for example, if the Germans moved, as I understand it, they moved their... I don't think it matters if they're in a port. The Germans move their fleet adjacent to enemy fleet, or one ship, no matter however many are there. And then automatically we have a general engagement. No, so yeah, the Germans would move adjacent, and then we would check for contact. So the contact differential would be checked, and we'd see if we meet each other. So you can move any number of hexes off map. So the Germans essentially, they're joining a submarine through the Kiel Canal with their fleet in Wilmershaven and steaming them. I say fleet, but actually it's a transport and 2 cruisers, steaming them off the North Sea and into the commerce raiding display. So they're going off to raid commerce. The transport's going with them to keep them supplied. Then it makes sense for the Germans to send the rest of their fleet through the Kiel Canal, because the Danish waters there are restricted, so the Entente cannot come round through there. So they're essentially saved from there, seeing as the Entente can't move through the Kiel Canal. There's a fortress at one end of it. Now what shall I do with the Austro-Hungarian fleet, such as it is? I think we're going to go for trying a good general engagement, so I'll send them, that's here, down here through the Adriatic, past Crete, and then down towards Alexandria here. So now we have to go to the contact table, and that depends on who's got the slowest ship, essentially. So the newer edition apparently has silhouettes instead of these letters. But anyway, so this is the contact rating, the first number. So that's the Brits, and the slowest ship on here is 2, and the slowest here is 1. So attackers contact rating 2 minus defenders, so we get a +1. I will roll a die. We get some column shifts. Attacking fleet contains all German. 2 right, no. All attacking fleet British. Defender in port. That's it. Okay, so 1 right if the defender is in the port. So we go +1, so we're on the +2. Air doctrine level. Defending fleet contains all British, German and or US naval units. Okay, so -1 because they're Brits. And I rolled a 4, so we get a C. So an N would be no contact, C is contact, resolve combat simultaneously, D defender advantage, A attacker advantage. So so one would go first. So now one side can refuse combat. If a side refuses combat, then no combat occurs. All units in the withdrawing force must move to the nearest friendly port. But then the other side can pursue. So they would have to move to somewhere in France, pursued by the Austro-Hungarian fleet, which doesn't make sense. So I think they're going to stand. We'll just see the outcome of this combat. So we go to the naval combat table. Okay, so we combine the combat strength, which is the middle number. So total firing strength, and it's simultaneous, is 9 on this side. There's column shifts on campaign cards cause column shifts. Well, we're on the Middle East. No one's got... in fact, the Brits will get a shift. Have they played their contingency card yet? I think they should have. So we'll say they should have. They would have. Okay, so Austro-Hungarians get 1, so nothing. And then 3, 4, 5 shifted 1 to the right, so same column. And they get 2 is a 1. Total target protection factors eliminated. So that means an escort's going to go down. Okay, and then I think they rebase at the end of the turn. And that's that. Well, the Ottomans have joined the war, and they steamed right in, and with the aid of German cruiser, they scored 4 protection hits against 0 against them. It was the same contact, simultaneous contact, which destroys the whole Alexandrian fleet, including the transport. So that's problems for the Entente, which is exactly what was wanted. That's, it's going to occupy their fleets. Okay, so that is it for the Central Powers fleets this impulse. It does mean that there's a transport here and a transport there, which are unguarded. They are in ports, but because they weren't taken out, obviously they would slow down the combat forces. But you know, if the Entente wish to try and intercept them or go into their port and attack, they can do so. One thing that's possible as well is you can use fog of war counters. There's a certain number per player. I think it's about 10, and you can have a maximum of 10 fleets, 10 squadrons in a fleet. So you can put fog of war counters here or on your map display up to that limit to try and confuse the enemy of what you have at any one place. I actually just added a pre-dreadnought ship that I found down here in Qatar, so a bit of protection there. And for fog of war, Central Powers do have. So actually I'll be sticking those there just to look like an impressive something. And then some more in the Ottoman region. Now I'll just show you this commerce rating table now. It would be rolled forward towards the end of the turn, but essentially because so the Central Powers have got some units in the commerce rating display, the Entente will have a chance to put some in. And then you will compare contact strengths and then roll a die. And the number is the number of merchant ships that are eliminated. Also, you could eliminate attacking naval units if there's convoy defenders, or one allied to convoying naval unit could get destroyed. Now, so that will reduce the Entente merchant shipping level, which starts at 100. As that goes down, starts at 100, if it goes into the 80s, you start rolling a d6 each turn. For example, in the 61 to 80 on 5 or 6, you reduce Allied morale by 5 points. So you can see it's caused a lot of commerce damage, and the table above, you're going to have to put a lot of the Central Powers fleet into it. To do that, you probably have to build a lot of ships to get up to this end of the table, but you can sort of bring it down 7, 8, 9 a go, and then create a lot of morale damage. So you can see that's going to be quite potentially quite a furious theatre of warfare, the commerce and that shipping section. I'm not sure what they intended to do about it, because if the Central Powers build ships here and they can fleet them straight off there, essentially what the intended would have to do is they'd have to put patrols with transport supplying them, which is going to slow them down for contact, but just try and intercept the commerce raiders scooting off into that box. And then also they're able to, not, they can't stick their whole fleet on convoy escort, but they can put some of the the non-dreadnought battleship ships, maybe cruisers as well, I can't remember, but you get the picture. So I think that's enough about shipping for now. I'll come back and probably address it again in another video as I've learnt more about it, some the finesse, and maybe look at bombardment, that's coastal bombardment and or amphibious invasions.